This section is on understanding integers. When we're looking at the problems in this section, there might be different ways that you can work the problem out and still get a correct answer, so I'll try and mention a couple different options to you. This first example, it says that workers remove 4 containers of 100 gallons of water from a water tank. So the question is, how much water is needed to return the water tank back to its original level? Assume 0 is the original level of the water tank. Okay, so there's different ways to do this. One way, what they did here is they looked on a number line. So if there's 4 containers and we're taking out 100 gallons per container, after 1 gallon that would take us back to negative 100, and then another container would take us to negative 200, and then negative 300, and then negative 400. So how much water would be needed to get it back to the original level? If we're at negative 400, you might be able to think about that we would have to add 400 gallons to get us back to 0, which the book shows here by going by hundreds. If you want to just take this all in one big swoop, you can do it that way too. They mention as another option, which we haven't really gotten into yet, that you could say 4 containers times negative 100 gallons per container would give us negative 400 gallons. And like I said, we haven't really gotten into the multiplication yet, so I don't know if that would be your best option at this point yet. So then to check this, they said negative 400 plus 400 equals 0. They talk about here opposite quantities. We've talked about opposites a little bit before. So instead of opposite quantities, if you want to think of these as opposites, are 2 integers that combine to make 0. So some examples of opposites, we just had negative 400 and 400, because you add those would equal 0. We could have negative 7 and 7. We could have 2 and negative 2. Okay, so basically with opposites, it's kind of like the same number except for opposite signs. One's positive and one is negative. As another example, we have a hot air balloon that's at an elevation of 500 feet. When it ascends 200 feet, it then ascends 200 feet and floats for an hour. And then it descends 200 feet. So what is its elevation? So this time the book just wrote an expression. So they said if it's starting at 500, that's 500. Then it ascends 200. Ascends means going up. So that's plus 200. And then it descends 200 feet. Descends is going down. So we could say plus negative 200, or you could say minus 200. If you write it this way, if you write an expression out, you might notice that we have some opposites here. So even though normally when we're adding numbers, normally we go from left to right, order of operations, commutative property says we can change the order, we can add the numbers in a different order. And that's kind of what the book's doing here, is they put these brackets around the 200 plus negative 200, because when you add those together, that's going to add up to be 0, since those are opposites. You go up 200, you go down 200, you're back where you were. So those can just cancel each other out, and so you can see that their final elevation would be 500 feet. If you wanted to, there's nothing that says you can't just work it out as it is. In other words, we don't have to necessarily worry about the opposites if you don't want to. So you could say 500 plus 200 is 700, and then plus negative 200 or minus 200 would be 500. Okay. You can also use a number line if you want to start at 500 on a number line. Start at 500, and then if you go up 200, you can think about that would take you to 700. And then if you go down 200, think about that's going to take you from 700 back to the 500. Okay, so like I said, lots of different ways that you can do these problems, and they're not really specifying a certain way that you have to do it. So we'll look at number 1. They want us to use a number line or expression to represent the situation and then solve. So they are giving us guidelines this time on how they want us to do this. So if we read the problem number 1, it says a football team lost 15 yards on a penalty. They then gained 15 yards with a completed pass. What is the overall amount of change? So different ways to do this. If you want to do a number line, you can. We're going to think about it that we're starting at 0. It's kind of the line of scrimmage, as they call it. If they lost 15 yards, that's going to take them back to negative 15. And then if they gained 15 yards, if we're at negative 15, if we gain 15 yards, we're going to go to the right 15. So negative 15, if you go to the right 15, that's going to take you back to 0. So the overall amount of change would be 0, which basically just means they're back to that original line of scrimmage. Another way of putting it, if you wrote an expression, you could say lost 15 yards is negative 15, and then gained 15 yards would be plus 15. So negative 15 plus 15, this is the opposites like we talked about earlier, so negative 15 plus 15 is 0. So then if we look at number 2, it says Taro had $30. He spent $25 and then earned $25. How much money does he have now? So had $30, spent $25, and then earned $25. We could look at it like this: 30 minus 25 plus 25. Here, if you want to just work this across, let me show you 2 ways here. I'm going to rewrite this, and we're going to look at this 2 different ways. So one way is just work it out like we normally would have. We could do 30 minus 25. So if you have $30 and spend $25, you would have $5. And then plus $25 would bring you back to $30. That's one way to do this. Another option you have, just to show you, is they're subtracting, so it's minus 25. You could add the opposite there. Add the opposite, make 2 sign changes. And then at that point, everything's being added. So when you're adding, you can add. If it's only adding, you can add in a different order if you want. So you might notice we have opposites here. Negative 25 plus 25 cancels out, or that's 0 if you want to think of it that way. Okay. And then the third option you have, once again, would be to do a number line. So a number line, if you're at $30 and then spending 25, means we're going to go to the left 25. So 30 minus 25 would take you to 5. And then earned 25, we're going to go back to the right 25. Brings us to 30. So no matter which way you do out of those options, that is going to make it to be that he has $30 now. The next section, they want us to name the opposite quantity in each situation. So if you look at number 4, the original situation is climbing down 3 steps. So we want to know the opposite quantity. So the opposite of going down 3 steps would be climbing up 3 steps. And then if we look at number 5, the opposite of borrowing $100, the opposite of borrowing $120 could be paying back $120. Another way you could look at this would be giving $120 would work, I guess. Or loaning, if you want to think of loaning versus just giving 120, because if you're borrowing it, the assumption is you're going to pay it back, I guess. Okay, so that's examples of opposite quantities. The next section, they want us to circle the pair of opposite quantities and then simplify. So if you look at number 10, circling opposite quantities, circling the opposites. So we're looking for numbers that have the same number part but different signs. So it looks like on number 10, our opposites would be the negative 51 meters and the positive 51 meters. Those are opposites. So it says then simplify. So negative 51 plus 51 is 0. Plus 26 is 26, so 26 meters. Or once again, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to just think of those canceling each other out, and you can just go straight to the 26 meters is okay also. Number 11, since the directions say circle the opposite quantities, I'm going to go ahead on this one. Let me bring this down here. I'm going to go ahead on this. Where they're subtracting, I'm going to add the opposite. I'm going to make 2 sign changes anywhere where they're subtracting. So when it says minus 12C, add the opposite. That's the same as plus negative 12C. And then minus 5 degrees Celsius, minus 5, add the opposite is the same as plus negative 5. At that point, we can look for the opposite quantities. The opposite quantities, again, it's the same number but opposite signs. So that would be the 5 and the negative 5. 5 plus negative 5 is 0. Those cancel out. So if you wanted to just directly go to your answer and say it's going to be negative 12 degrees Celsius, you can. If you'd like to. Otherwise, you can do 0, you can say that 5 plus negative 5 equals 0, and then 0 plus negative 12 is negative 12 degrees Celsius. If we look at number 13, the directions just say solve. So it doesn't tell us a certain way we have to do this, like use a number line or look for opposites or anything. It just says solve. So let's think about this. Dave borrowed $15 from his mother and $10 from his sister. He paid back $10 to his mother. And the question is, what is the total amount of money he still owes? So since it just says solve, it's kind of however you want to do this technically. I'll mention how you might be likely to do this problem, and then I'll mention a way we could do this similar to the problems we've been doing. So if he borrowed $15 and then borrowed $10, one way to do it would just be, let's think of how much money he's borrowed. So 15 plus 10 would be $25. So he's borrowed $25, and then he pays back $10. So right now, if he owes $25, he pays back $10. So the question, what is the total amount of money he still owes? We could say he still owes $15. Okay, so that's one way you could do that problem, technically, since it just says solve. What they're wanting us probably to do is think of it as borrowed $15 would be negative 15, and then borrowed negative 10, or borrowed $10 would be like plus negative 10. And then if he pays back $10, that's taking away a $10 debt. So that's like minus the negative $10. We're taking away a $10 debt there. And so if you do that, we've talked about this before, subtracting, you can add the opposite here, make two sign changes. So that would be the same as plus a positive 10. And then at that point, we could see these as opposites. Negative 10 plus 10 is 0. And then negative 15 plus 0 is negative 15. Since it's negative, that represents owing, that he owes still $15. Okay, so that's a couple of options for you. You could also use a number line. I'll go ahead and mention while we're at it, I guess. So on a number line, borrows $15 and then borrows $10 more. So if we're at negative 15 and we go back 10 more, is going to take us to negative 25, and then pays back $10. So we go to the right 10 is going to take us back to that negative 15. Okay. So once again, lots of different options for how to work these problems in this section. Just make sure you follow the directions of what they ask you to do, though, in case they are more specific. So this gives you an idea about understanding integers. Have a good day.